Welcome to the Dream Novel channel. Before starting to listen to the fun in this clip, don't forget to like and comment, so that the admin will have the encouragement to continue making clips. Let's go listen. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 111, Dumbledore's Crooked Nose. News of Oren's disappearance quickly spread throughout the wizarding world. The Daily Prophet portrayed him as a deranged dark wizard of the utmost evil, devoting an entire page to his wanted poster. The rest of the paper praised the Ministry of Magic for successfully rescuing 2 students during the operation, though few actually read that part. Many parents wrote to the school, requesting an early holiday. What if Oren was still lurking in the Forbidden Forest? The idea of leaving their children at Hogwarts unsettled them. Dumbledore agreed, and arrangements were made for the students to leave early on the Hogwarts Express that day, with report cards to follow by Owl in the coming days. In just a single day, Hogwarts lost a third of its student body, and the castle felt strangely empty. Yet Kyle remained, as did Cedric and a few others. Chris returned from his travels and, after a long journey, finally arrived at Hogwarts. He looked Kyle over multiple times before he let out a sigh of relief. Taking Kyle to an empty classroom, he spoke in a stern tone. "I told you not to get involved in this." "It was an accident," Kyle replied honestly. "I'll be more careful next time." Chris, clearly unsatisfied, lectured him at length. Kyle, however, didn't argue. He simply nodded, accepting his mistake with a calm demeanor. As they left the classroom, they happened to see Newt coming out of Dumbledore's office. Chris asked Kyle if he wanted to return together, but Kyle declined, saying he wanted to take the train back with his friends. Chris considered this for a moment, then agreed. The next day, Kyle didn't expect Diana to show up as well. Unlike Chris, Diana went first to the Forbidden Forest, then directly to the headmaster's office on the 8th floor. No one knows what transpired after that, but soon after, students noticed unfamiliar faces in some of the portraits along the castle corridors, figures who claimed to be former heads of Hogwarts. And most notably, the gargoyle on the 8th floor was gone. Kyle didn't know when Diana had left. That night, he and Cedric attended the end-of-year banquet together. The Great Hall was divided into 2 sections. The left side was adorned in green and silver for Slytherin, while the right side gleamed in yellow and black for Hufflepuff. Remarkably, the extra points Oren had given in the Forbidden Forest still counted, and together with the Quidditch Championship, Hufflepuff's house points were exactly the same as Slytherin's, tying them for first place. Kyle and Cedric walked over to the Hufflepuff table and sat down. Kyle noticed that Conna wasn't there either. After a short wait, Dumbledore arrived. Kyle couldn't help but think that Dumbledore's nose looked a little more crooked than before. The noise in the hall gradually faded as Dumbledore raised his voice to speak. "Another year has passed," he said enthusiastically. "Before you indulge in these delicious delicacies, I must trouble you all to listen to the musings of an old man. Despite the minor mishaps at the end, it has undoubtedly been an excellent year, and I suspect your young minds are fuller than ever before. You'll have the whole summer to digest it all before the new term begins. And now, let us proceed to the House Cup Award ceremony. The scores are as follows: 4th place, Gryffindor, with 101 points, 3rd place, Ravenclaw, with 332 points, and in a tie for 1st place, Slytherin and Hufflepuff, both with 497 points. But the expected cheers didn't come. Both Hufflepuff and Slytherin tables fell silent, each side casting dissatisfied glances at the other. There was only one house cup, and it couldn't be awarded to 2 houses at once. Students from Gryffindor and Ravenclaw settled back to enjoy the spectacle. "Yes, both houses have done exceptionally well," Dumbledore continued, clearing his throat. "But there's another recent event we must consider. Mr. Kyle Chopper." Every head in the hall turned toward Kyle. Not only did he save a first-year student in the Forbidden Forest, but he also identified and helped apprehend the dark wizard hiding on the grounds, showing great bravery and courage. For this, I have decided to award him the special award for services to the school and an additional 200 points to Hufflepuff. Though attendance was lower than usual, the cheers were deafening. Anyone standing outside the hall might have thought something had exploded. There was no need to calculate any further. Hufflepuff had broken Slytherin's 6-year streak and won the House Cup. And Kyle had earned the all-important special award for services to the school. Fred and George stood on their bench, shouting to Kyle, "Don't worry, Kyle, when we get you into detention later, we'll make sure to polish your trophy real good. And shinier than all the rest." George added, grinning. Professor McGonagall shot them a withering glare, suddenly feeling weary. "Which means," Dumbledore bellowed, "we need to make a few changes to the decorations here." He clapped his hands, and the green streamers transformed into yellow, the silver turned black, and a huge banner featuring the Hufflepuff badger appeared behind the guest of honor's seat. Meanwhile, Snape was shaking Professor Sprout's hand, his expression calm, his trademark smile plastered on his face as if nothing were amiss. Before term ended, exam results were released. Kyle had performed exceptionally well, earning the highest grades in his year. Cedric glanced over Kyle's report card in surprise. "Merlin, your scores are even higher than mine were last year, and you only missed a perfect score by 1 point, it's such a shame." Kyle felt a twinge of regret himself. He'd been writing so fluently during the exam that he didn't notice he'd listed 13 uses for dragon's blood instead of 12, which had cost him that single point. Apparently, the professors didn't agree that dragon's blood could be used in cooking. Aside from this small oversight, he'd received perfect scores in all his other subjects, including potions. Snape had even awarded him full marks for his Boil Cure potion, a rare honor, even among Slytherin students. Conna had come in second in their year, and with Cedric leading his own year as well, Hufflepuff had clearly excelled. Professor Sprout, delighted, hardly went to the greenhouse anymore, instead spending her time proudly lingering around the other professors whenever she had a free moment. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 112, The Rat Witch. In what felt like an instant, the students' wardrobes were emptied, and the dormitories fell silent, no longer filled with the chatter and laughter of young wizards. Yet, unlike at the beginning of the school year, the walls now displayed photos the students had chosen to leave behind. The Quidditch players in these pictures continued their routines, repeatedly throwing the ball, celebrating, and cheering, as though they knew their owners would be back soon. Each student received a notice warning them not to use magic over the holidays. With Hagrid still at St. Mungo's, Professor McGonagall took over the duty of leading the students onto the flotilla that would ferry them across the lake. On the Hogwarts Express, Kyle politely declined the Weasley twins' invitation to join them in their compartment. They wanted to discuss future plans, how to earn galleons next term, and brainstorm ideas for selling their products outside Hogwarts. Enchanted by the prospect of making even more money after their recent windfall of 100 galleons, the twins hadn't even bothered looking for the password to the Marauders map in the last days of term. They'd been too busy planning. "I hope they come up with something good," Kyle thought. As he walked along the train, he reached the last compartment and pushed the door open. Inside, there was only one person. Conna was curled up on a seat, gazing out the window at the orderly wheat fields passing by. Kyle sat down across from her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Are you still upset about Pocky?" he asked gently. "Her name wasn't Pocky," Conna replied softly after a long silence. "Her name was Rattray, and she was sort of my great-aunt." Conna seemed ready to talk, and she shared a great deal. Outside, the countryside grew greener and more orderly as the train passed through one Muggle town after another. Gradually, Kyle pieced together what had happened. It was, in essence, a story he'd heard versions of before. 11 years ago, Conna's father had carelessly uttered Voldemort's name while drunk, and Death Eaters had arrived in response, killing him. Fortunately, Conna and her mother hadn't been home at the time and had escaped. However, shortly before the school year began last year, Conna's mother had died in an accident, leaving Conna as the last member of the Prince family. Although the Prince family wasn't as prominent as the Sacred 28, it was still a distinguished pureblood family, and this turn of events drew considerable attention. That was when Rattray, or Pocky as Conna had known her, appeared. After arriving, Rattray quickly discovered that the prince family's estate had long since been divided among other pure-blood families. So, she turned her attention to the family's Gringotts vault, aiming to steal the key by using her animagus form. She planned to find a way to eliminate Kanna afterward and claim the vault's contents as a distant relative of the prince family. Rattray did manage to locate the key. However, like many pure-blood families, the princes had hidden treasures that were heavily protected, and the box containing the vault key could only be opened by a direct descendant. To complicate matters further, Rattray didn't know the Imperious Curse, nor did she dare seek a partner for fear of betrayal. Just as she was struggling to figure out a solution, Kanna, lonely and grieving, grew attached to the rat that had always been around, taking it to Hogwarts as her pet. Seeing this as an opportunity, Rattray manipulated Kanna, subtly encouraging her to withdraw money from the vault and attempting to make her leave Hogwarts at the first opportunity. The plan might have succeeded. If nothing had interfered, Kanna would have gone home over Christmas to access the vault. But Kyle's intervention had saved her life. According to Kanna, after Rattray was given Veritaserum, she had spent the entire interrogation muttering curses about the meddling boy. Kyle stroked his chin thoughtfully. "So, I saved your life." "That's right," Kanna nodded, feeling noticeably lighter after getting it all off her chest. "Then you really should thank me," Kyle said with a grin. "And now that you don't have a pet mouse, I've lost a big tonic order, you know." "I'll just buy more," Kanna replied, reaching into her moleskin pouch and placing it on the table. "Same deal as before, 1 bottle a month until it's used up." The pouch was filled with galleons. In addition to the original 100, it contained the stolen ones that had been recovered, totaling around 150. "And the mouse? I can just go to Diagon Alley and buy another one." "Are you sure you still want a mouse?" Kyle asked, giving her a doubtful look. "What does it matter to you?" Kanna's face darkened slightly, clearly reminded of what had happened in the Forbidden Forest. "Are you taking the deal or not? Otherwise, I'm not buying it." "Who'd turn down galleons if they're offered?" Kyle said quickly, slipping the pouch into his pocket. "By the way, like with your previous mouse, are there a lot of people after your family's vault?" Kanna turned her head to the side, remaining silent, but her expression gave Kyle all the answer he needed. In a world as small as theirs, any pure-blood family had no shortage of distant relatives eyeing their wealth. No wonder Kanna seemed reluctant to go back after exams. "Tell you what," Kyle began thoughtfully, tapping his fingers on the table. "Forget the tonic. Since you're paying me anyway, how about I help you handle this little situation?" "What do you mean?" Kanna tilted her head, looking puzzled. "Leave it to me," he replied confidently. "I promise, no one will bother you over the summer." "Really?" Kanna eyed him skeptically, clearly doubting he could deliver. "You don't have to try to reassure me, I can deal with them. Just wait and see. I won't let you down." Kyle didn't elaborate further. Instead, he pulled out a pile of snacks, placing them on the table. He was starting to get hungry, and with little else available on the train, he had to make do. At that moment, Cedric and Cho Chang appeared, pushing open the compartment door. "Kanna, I've been looking for you," Cho said as she sat down beside Kanna, her tone full of concern. "Are you alright? Feeling any better?" "Much better," Kanna replied with a small smile. Actually, Cedric and Cho had been by earlier but hadn't come in. "Kyle, what are your plans for the summer?" Cedric asked, opening a bag of chocolate frogs. "My dad's taking me to France. You should come along." "France?" Kyle considered the idea. It was a tempting thought, he'd always been curious about Beauxbatons Academy. But it was quite far. After a moment, Kyle shook his head. "Maybe next time, Cedric. I've got other plans this summer." "Shame," Cedric said, sounding disappointed. "I'll bring you back a present." Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 113, Kyle, Run Quickly. A little while later, Fred and George arrived, making the compartment feel quite cramped. "Why can't Hogwarts get bigger compartments for the train?" Fred complained. "I heard the prefect's compartment is bigger and more comfortable," George added with a grin. "Unfortunately, none of us are prefects." "Speaking of prefects, Percy will be a head boy next year, won't he?" Kyle noted. Fred pulled a face as though Kyle had just announced that Quidditch was cancelled for next season. "As much as I hate to admit it, that's probably true," George sighed. "And I bet he'll be wearing that prefect badge the entire holiday." With that, he stuck a chocolate frog card to his chest, puffed out his chest, and strutted down the corridor outside the compartment, mimicking Percy's mannerisms. His exaggerated expressions and pompous walk had everyone laughing. The Weasley twins always knew how to lighten the mood. After a few rounds of exploding chewing gum, Cho brought up the ministry notice again, wondering if they really couldn't use any magic over the holidays. "Well, technically you can," Fred replied, "as long as there's an adult wizard nearby. That way, the ministry can't tell who actually cast the spell." Cho frowned. "Forget it, then." As the train passed through more towns, Kyle and his friends took off their wizard robes, swapping them for jackets and short-sleeved shirts. Finally, the Hogwarts Express pulled into King's Cross Station, platform 9 3/4. A shriveled old guard stood at the partition to manage the flow, allowing only 2 or 3 people through at a time to avoid drawing attention from muggles. Thankfully, with fewer students aboard this time, Kyle and his friends soon crossed the barrier after saying goodbye to Kanna, who would be catching the night bus home. The group made their way toward the station exit. Cho's father was there waiting for her, a kind-looking Eastern man who greeted everyone warmly and invited them to visit over the summer. Kyle, however, caught a trace of apprehension in his gaze, especially when directed toward him and Cedric. "Kyle, run," a familiar voice called out. Ginny Weasley, the youngest Weasley, dashed over, her expression urgent. "Did you get into trouble at school? Mum was furious on the way here. You'd better run while you can." "Thanks for the heads up, Ginny," Kyle replied, ruffling her hair with a smile. "But I'm afraid it's too late now." As Ginny had warned, Mrs. Weasley approached in a fury. "Good luck, mate," Ginny whispered as she stepped aside. "We'll remember you fondly," Fred and George chimed in with mock solemnity, their grins betraying their delight at the unfolding scene. "You actually went into the Forbidden Forest, with a dark wizard, no less," Mrs. Weasley said, her voice sharp with anger. "Do you have any idea how dangerous that was?" Behind her, Diana stood with a stern expression. Kyle didn't hesitate, nodding and saying, "You're right, I was wrong. I promise I won't do it again." As he spoke, he swiftly pulled out his report card. "No matter what you pull out, this time you won't," Mrs. Weasley's words trailed off as she glanced at his grades. Full marks, nearly every subject was full marks, with only a single deduction in one. It was a report card to rival Bill's in his best years. "Oh, Merlin," Mrs. Weasley murmured, wiping her hands on her skirt as she accepted the report card with great care. "Kyle, you're destined to be head boy one day," she said proudly, her relief evident. She turned to Fred and George. "And where are your report cards? Let's have a look." The twins' faces froze in forced smiles, clearly wishing they could say they'd lost them. They knew better, though. Mrs. Weasley would simply write to Hogwarts if they didn't hand them over. But if they presented them now, they might not make it out of King's Cross in one piece. Seeing their hesitation, Mrs. Weasley's gaze turned steely. "Our report cards are in the suitcase, Mum," Fred blurted. "It's not convenient here. We'll show you at home." "Yeah, plus there are newspapers in there too. What if a muggle accidentally sees?" George added quickly. Mrs. Weasley looked around at the muggle crowd and, after a moment's thought, nodded. "All right, then. We'll head home." At that point, Kyle walked over to Diana. Though her expression was stern, she didn't scold him outright. Instead, she glanced at his hand. "How many times have you used it, she asked, indicating the ring on his finger. Kyle knew she was asking about his apparition ring, so he held up one finger. Only once. Originally adorned with a crescent moon design, the ring now showed one missing piece. Diana's face softened. If it had only been used once, it meant the situation hadn't been too dire. Kyle asked tentatively, "Can it be fixed?" He recalled Diana mentioning in a letter that he could use the ring for direct travel if he didn't feel like taking the train. If it could be used as a regular means of transport, then it must be reparable. Just as he'd hoped, Diana nodded. "Yes, but it's a bit of a hassle and will take about a week." Kyle sighed with relief. A week, a month, either was fine. He didn't need it anytime soon. Just as when they'd arrived, Mr. Weasley drove them all back to Ottery St. Catchpole Village in the magically extended car. During the drive, Fred and George's grins had vanished. They looked as if they were heading not home, but straight to the gallows. Once they returned to the Burrow, Percy proudly presented his report card. Unsurprisingly, he'd earned the top marks in his 4th year. Mrs. Weasley gave him an enthusiastic hug, though her joy was a touch tempered by the memory of Kyle's near-perfect grades. Then her gaze shifted to Fred and George. Kyle crossed his arms, anticipating the scene to come, but before he could watch it unfold, Diana quietly tugged him away. As they made their way home, 2 distinct, anguished cries rang out, echoing over the rooftops of Ottery St. Catchpole, lingering in the village air for a long while. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 114, The Special Letter in the Living Room. Chris sat on the sofa, chatting with Mr. Weasley. On the way back, Mr. Weasley had noticed the glum expressions on Fred and George's faces and knew trouble was brewing. Rather than heading home, he'd hopped out of the car and headed straight to Chris's house, where he could avoid the scene and give Molly some space. Molly had been on edge for days, worried sick over the news of a dark wizard sighting at Hogwarts. She hadn't eaten or slept well, and it pained him to see her so strained. Now that it was over, perhaps she could let off steam by giving the twins a firm talking to. Given their antics, it was an opportunity he wasn't about to disrupt. When Mr. Weasley saw Kyle enter, he greeted him warmly. "Ah, Kyle. I never got around to asking, how's school been?" "Honestly, it's been great," Kyle replied. "The professors are easygoing, and the students are friendly. It's just what I'd hoped school life would be." "That's wonderful, Mr. Weasley said, taking a sip of fire whiskey. "Time flies, doesn't it? Soon, you'll be starting your 2nd year, and Ron will be starting his 1st. Chris laughed. "That'll lighten the load for you and Molly, won't it?" "Yes, true enough," Mr. Weasley chuckled. "Though Ginny's still at home, and she's no easier than her brothers." He proceeded to tell a few tales about Ginny's feisty personality and the ongoing battles between her and Ron. Kyle wasn't especially interested in these stories, so he took his luggage upstairs. By the time he came back down, Mr. Weasley was making his farewells. "Are you sure you won't stay for dinner?" "Molly's made plenty," Mr. Weasley offered. "Maybe next time, Arthur," Chris replied with a smile. "Besides, you may be eager to catch up with Charlie now that he's graduated." "But I'll come over for a drink later," Chris said. "I've brought back some giggle water from North America. It's the real deal." Mr. Weasley's face lit up. "Now that's something I've been wanting to try for ages." The two shared a parting grin. Both Chris and Mr. Weasley enjoyed a drink in their free time, though they always kept their indulgence in check, unless something truly special happened, like the day Ginny was born. That night, Mr. Weasley had gotten so joyfully drunk he'd stopped every passerby to share tales of his romance with Mrs. Weasley. It remained his most embarrassing memory, one he tried to erase from everyone's mind. Not long after Mr. Weasley left, the sounds of dinner preparation filled the kitchen. Drumsticks lined up to be coated in egg and breadcrumbs, while a knife floated in the air, shredding cabbage into precise, even strips. The pasta shells, already stuffed, scooted into the oven, greasing themselves with oil as they went. Diana never liked using magic for directly cooking food, feeling it lacked a certain something. Soon enough, though, a delicious meal was ready. Coincidentally, she and Chris had both completed their work just in time to celebrate Kyle's return from his first school year. The three of them gathered at the table, eating and chatting, with Kyle doing most of the storytelling about his school adventures, which Chris and Diana were most eager to hear. Kyle picked some of the more amusing highlights: his quirky roommate, who seemed to be an expert on forbidden spells, the thrills of the Quidditch season, and the fun he and his friends had selling maps and small trinkets. However, he wisely left out certain stories, like his ventures into the Room of Requirement or sneaking into the restricted section after hours. He had no intention of joining the Weasley twins in the chorus of anguished yells that had just echoed through the village. Chris and Diana listened quietly as Kyle spoke, but soon their expressions shifted. "Wait." Chris raised an eyebrow, unable to stop himself from interrupting. "You sold 700 galleons worth of rowan twigs?" "That's just the raw material," Kyle replied seriously. "From gathering, selecting, the right branches to completing the finished product, it took all 6 of us 6 months. 700 galleons is barely a fair fee for all our hard work." "Really?" Chris looked at him skeptically. Something about Kyle's story didn't sit right with him, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly what. It seemed almost impossible that 6 young wizards could earn 700 galleons in just 6 months. He certainly hadn't pulled off anything like that during his school days. If Chris was merely suspicious, Diana was sure Kyle wasn't telling the whole truth. In her view, Kyle would never spend 6 months of his life for only 100 galleons. The story sounded bloated, maybe more like half a month's worth of effort. "Oh, by the way, Dad," Kyle said, as though suddenly remembering something, "I'm not sure if Fred and George have mentioned their earnings to their family. So when you're having a drink with Mr. Weasley later, maybe don't let that slip." Kyle genuinely had forgotten to mention it, and it had nothing to do with their earlier boasting at the station. Chris took a sip of butterbeer, muttering a barely discernible response. After dinner, Chris helped clear the table before grabbing an elegant bottle of wine and heading off to see Mr. Weasley. Kyle, meanwhile, returned to his room. Though he hadn't been home for most of the year, the room was spotless and didn't have any stale odor, suggesting it had been cleaned in advance. His suitcase lay on the floor, so he unpacked a bit and took out a stack of parchment, setting it on the desk. Before going to bed, he had one last task to complete, the one he promised Conna on the train. He'd been paid 150 galleons to take care of the issue, and if he didn't follow through, he risked getting a bad reputation. Kyle picked up a quill and ink, and soon, the sound of his writing filled the room. He wrote steadily, finishing 2 full pages on the parchment before stopping. After checking over his work to ensure it was satisfactory, he placed it in an envelope. Just then, Ratton flew in through the window and lifted one leg instinctively. Just like before, Kyle instructed, glancing at the name on the envelope. "Head to the Owl Post Office in Diagon Alley and send it from there." Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 115, Werewolf. Chris and Diana only stayed home for 1 day before returning to the Ministry of Magic early the next morning. They had plenty to catch up on, especially Chris, who had been away for half a year and was facing a mountain of paperwork. Left alone, Kyle decided to visit Hagrid. St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries was located in London, disguised as an old department store. Much like the Leaky Cauldron, it was protected by a Muggle-repelling charm, so Muggles only saw a "closed for renovation" sign on the door and couldn't enter. In front of the display window, Kyle spotted an ugly mannequin. Leaning close, he whispered, "I'm here to see a patient." The doll nodded slightly and waved its joined fingers, signaling him to go inside. Just as one must go through the wall to reach platform 9 3/4, entering St. Mungo's required passing through the glass window. It was Kyle's first time at St. Mungo's, and, as the wizarding world's most famous hospital, it was bustling with unusual patients. Not long after he entered, he spotted an elderly wizard with a leg on his head, skipping toward the information desk in the waiting room. The sight was so strange that others in line stared, quickly offering him their place. "No, no, please, "You go first," said the elderly wizard politely. "I just feel a bit dizzy. If someone could hold my head steady, that would be great." But no one dared to help, not out of distrust, but because the leg on his head was kicking wildly in every direction, making it impossible to approach. Eventually, a heavy-set blonde witch from the information desk came out and escorted him away. As they left, his head leg swung aggressively, seemingly trying to kick her. Kyle was directed to the second floor's creature-induced injuries ward, where a curly-haired healer told him where to find Hagrid. "The big fellow? He's in Janus Thicke's ward, opposite the specimen room. Actually, I'll just show you." The healer led Kyle to a door painted a deep red. "This is it," he said, pushing the door open. "Rubius Hagrid, you have a visitor." Came a low, muffled grunt from inside. Kyle stepped into a spacious room with 6 beds, though only 3 were occupied. Aside from Hagrid, there were 2 other wizards present, one of whom was asleep. The other, to Kyle's surprise, was someone he recognized. "Professor Kettleburn, why are you here?" "Huh?" A bald wizard with a white beard looked up at Kyle, squinting in confusion. "Are you a student from Hogwarts?" "Yes, Professor," Kyle replied. "I'm in my 2nd year." "Ah, that explains it," Professor Kettleburn said, suddenly understanding. 2nd years didn't yet take care of magical creatures, so naturally, he hadn't met Kyle before. Why are you here?" Kyle asked, glancing at the professor's remaining arm and half a leg. He looked intact enough, but if any more limbs went missing, the professor might soon have to retire. "It's nothing," the old professor said dismissively, adjusting his bandages and waving a hand. "Just got hit by a unicorn, is all. Just a scratch, nothing serious. Now go on and see Hagrid." Kyle held back a smile. The horn of a unicorn wasn't just for show, it could pierce even dragon scales. Getting hit by one was no small matter. But for Professor Kettleburn, this sort of thing was routine. Hagrid was seated to the right of Professor Kettleburn, sprawled across 3 beds that barely contained him. When Hagrid saw Kyle, his eyes were a bit unfocused. "You. Kyle, why are you here? Shouldn't you be in class?" "It's summer vacation, Hagrid," Kyle replied, placing a box of wrapped sweets on the table beside him. "How are you feeling?" He made sure to offer a sweet to Professor Kettleburn as well. "Summer vacation already?" Hagrid muttered, rubbing his head. "I feel awful. It's like I've forgotten so much. Mr. Scamander came by 2 days ago and said it'll take at least a month of treatment before I get my memories back," he added, looking frustrated. "I don't want to stay here. I need to get Harry to Hogwarts." He shifted irritably, tugging at the hospital gown he'd pieced together with whatever fabric he could find, though even then, it was still a size too small. Hagrid had spent the entire year preparing to get Harry to Hogwarts, and now he feared Dumbledore might not let him go because of his condition. The thought was unbearable to him. "It's okay," Kyle reassured him. "It's only the start of summer. The acceptance letters won't be sent out for another month and a half, so you've got plenty of time." "I hope you're right," Hagrid sighed, fiddling with his clothes again. "Have faith, Hagrid. I'm sure the headmaster will let you go and fetch Potter," Kyle said, handing him a chocolate frog. "Have some chocolate. It might cheer you up." "Thank you, Kyle." Hagrid's eyes grew misty. "I never thought anyone but Dumbledore would come visit me here." "Wait, your name is Kyle?" Professor Kettleburn, who'd been quietly observing, suddenly perked up. "That unicorn cub, you didn't happen to find it, did you?" "Sort of," Kyle replied calmly. "But Orin only gave the cub back once he saw someone from the ministry show up. It just ended up with me." "The ministry, huh?" "Ha!" Professor Kettleburn scoffed. "Didn't expect those clowns to be of any help." He made no effort to hide his disdain for the Ministry of Magic. Turning to Kyle with interest, he asked, "You're a 2nd year, right?" Would you be interested in taking the Care of Magical Creatures course next year? It's the course I'm looking forward to the most, Professor, Kyle answered with a smile. From the neighboring ward, an argument could be heard. The voices were loud, and there was shouting, but Kyle couldn't make out what they were saying over the sound of a nearby patient snoring. After saying his goodbyes to Hagrid and Professor Kettleburn, Kyle stepped out into the corridor. The argument was louder here, accompanied by the sounds of objects breaking, as if a patient inside was resisting treatment and struggling violently. Unperturbed, Kyle closed the door and turned toward the stairs. Suddenly, boom! Before he could take a step, a fist burst through the door of the neighboring room, stopping right in front of Kyle. The arm was covered in coarse gray hair, and its claws were long, black, and curved. Before Kyle could process what was happening, a tall figure crashed through the door and dashed out into the corridor. The figure landed on its back legs, bearing a long, wolfish snout that opened and closed with a snarl. A werewolf? Kyle couldn't believe his eyes. It was broad daylight, how could there be a werewolf? Now the fun in this clip is over. Which listeners haven't liked and commented yet? You can press like and comment to encourage the admin find the fun in the next clip. May the listeners be happy forever.